Janice Cooper, who is the Denise Cooper, who is the WIA State Coordinator, Program Specialist, Workforce Development Agency, State of Michigan. And Chelsea Mates is the WIA State Coordinator, Program Specialist, Workforce Development Agency, the State of Michigan. And last but not least is Krista Johnson, the WIA Section Manager, Workforce Development Agency for the State of Michigan. Let's give them a hand of
Good afternoon. This presentation provides a quick overview of our new WIA program manual, and then the second part of the presentation will talk about the new WIOA legislation. With me here again are Chelsea and Krista, and as we go through the presentation, we welcome your comments. For the first portion, though, if you could save them to the end because it's relatively short. When we get into the WIOA portion, feel free to ask questions as we go. But please keep your questions brief because for a limited amount of time for the number of slides we have to go to, we want to be sure to be able to get through them all as we can. The WIA manual consolidates the information that was originally in the old PMIG when it switched to the ePMIG. What we did with the manual was to provide policy guidance and to take the things that were not transferred over to the ePMIG and put them into the WIA manual. It consolidates our existing state and federal guidelines and program policies. And yes, I need to flip on that. Sorry. And the purpose is to provide policy guidance and interpretation of federal and state workforce laws. The procedural guidance then will assure consistency. And if there is a conflict between state and federal policy, of course, state or federal policy overrules what would be local policy. State and federal policy will prevail. So to make the manual sort of easy and a useful tool, we've included icons to go within some of the sections. So the light bulb then will be, things notated with the light bulb are for requirements and recommendations. And of course, as usual, an attachment would be a paper clip. Best practices are the blue ribbon. Links to other web-based resources such as the eligibility matrix through Workforce 3.1 are shown with a link. I guess I could point those out. And then peer-to-peer resources such as resources from other states, best practices and things would be shown by the little two guys talking there. And then of course, as we know, everybody needs a reminder, so we do have yellow boxes for things that are reminders. It also features an interactive table of contents, which will connect you to the appropriate section by clicking on the table of contents, what it is you're looking to look at. The pages are numbered sequentially within each chapter, which will make it easier for us to update as needed, and you can actually remove the pages and replace them in your manual. Please note, though, that the date issued, which is in the footer of the manual, and supersedes, which is in the footer on each page, refers to the issuance of the manual. It does not refer to effective dates or anything like that. Again, it's the date that we issued that section of the manual. We also have with the manual an appendix which has the most commonly used forms, which MWAs are using. We did a survey, and I don't know if any of you remember the survey of what forms were commonly used. And as it was, there were only a couple of forms that MWAs were actually using. You're still free to make your own forms, but the forms that we provided, you can either use as a template or it will give you information on what you might, what you need to actually include on your form in order so that it'll pass program reviews and data validation. We also have a list of acronyms and a glossary of terms and definitions and the WIA Performance Handbook. Those are out on our state intranet rather than included with the manual because they do affect more than just the WIA program. So if you want to take a look at any acronyms or things that we're using, it would be www.michigan.gov/WDA. We've also added some new items to the manual. So I am so sorry. We've added some updated policy from recent TGOs that affect eligibility, such as the DREAM Act legislation, as well as the DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. We've also added educational functioning levels, career preparation and inspiration initiatives, the 2014 poverty and LLSIL guidelines, and an entire chapter devoted to credentials. We're hoping for continuous improvement on the manual to expand the resources and best practices and things. So what we're counting on is for you to give us your comments and best practices so that we can continue to update the manual and include all of the best practices and things from us. It's a manual for you to use and for us to be able to do some peer-to-peer resources and things like that. We also want to thank those of you that did provide comments to the manual. When we go ahead and issue new manuals, we'll go through the same process. You'll be looking at us sending it out for review and comment, having a comment period, incorporating comments and getting back. But that doesn't mean you have to wait till the review process. You can also do that at any time, and we're glad to take those. We may not update the manual right away, but we will take those into consideration. So, as we're just about ready to issue the manual, WIOA came into effect. So my crystal ball did not work, and the entire WIA manual will be redone upon implementation of WIOA. So before we move into the WIOA, are there any questions?
I'd like to add too, we do really appreciate all of the feedback that we received during the review and comment period for the WIA meeting. And so we have worked diligently through all those comments. We had a few questions we needed to get answered, and we should be ready to issue that WIA manual final here shortly. So you should be seeing that very soon.
Is that going to be an electronic manual, or will it be issued in hard copy also?
It's going to be issued
Electronically. Hopefully issued soon. That answered the next question I was anticipating. Yes, go ahead.
You're saying updates will be out for review?
Yes.
Are you saying the manual as a whole will be out, or are you just going to send a specific update?
Just the specific updates.
So we would use, like, if there were changes to a specific chapter, then say it was chapter 2, you would see that chapter out for review, utilizing the same process that we use for our policy. So it would go out for review and comment for a number of business days. You'd submit your comments, and then we'd finalize it and issue an updated chapter.
In the briefings, we'll detail exactly what is being
Okay.
changed in that.
And then I believe with the manual also will be a continuous running list of changes so that you can refer back to when something might have changed as far as a chapter or a
We
section.
definitely heard from the planners group that was something important to have when you're needing to look back historically, whether you're doing your own monitoring or we're out monitoring your DOLs and have data validation going on. You want to be able to kind of go back and track what policy was in place at that time. So we are definitely going to be cognizant of that and have a tool as updates are issued for you to be able to track that.
Any more questions? Okay. Oh, go ahead, Carrie.
When this is officially released, will there be a breakdown of what the new policies are, since this is a new policy issuance? Like what you had just provided as being new, newly incorporated with income levels or DOMA, things of that nature, will that be easily broken out so that we can make sure that we're paying specific attention to those things in the manual for easy reference?
Yeah, like what we do now when we send them out is send out our policy issuances, we do notate the change.
Yeah.
So it will, we will have that same review type process where it'll notate what the change is being made, and then we'll send out the relevant sections of the manual.
Okay, but when just this new one that's coming out, the official WIA manual is released for the first time,
Right, and
does
then,
it say what those updates are, what some of those new things are that are in there? Or will we need to just carefully read through all of it? So for DOMA specifically, say we're releasing it to our contractors, for them to pay special attention that these are new things in there, or is that something we as managers should just do
The
ourselves?
official release briefing, what it will detail, and again, in keeping with our regular practice and procedures for policies, will detail the changes made to the draft based upon review and comment. But yeah, if you want to dig into a little bit more of those actual policy changes, for example, for information and pieces where you may have to add a little bit more to that briefing than what is there. We're really kind of detailing in that briefing what we've changed since you saw it out, we reviewed.
Yeah, that's what I was specifically
Oh,
wondering
okay.
about too, so
Yep.
thank you.
and then
there
it
will
will,
also be a listing of any policy issuances or any documentation that's been rescinded as a result of the manual, because now that information has been incorporated. So you'll be able to tell what information has been added and what policies are no longer valid.
Great, thank you so much.
yeah, you took the words right out of my mouth. Okay, so we've been through the questions. So, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA, was signed on July 22nd, 2014. Given the fact that WIOA aligns nicely with the direction we've been moving, we plan to be in early implementation state. The WIOA was passed with a wide partisan majority, and it builds on proven practices such as sector strategies, career pathways, regional economic approaches, and work-based learning. In comparison to WIA, the WIOA is much more comprehensive. It streamlines the roles of the state and local boards, provides more flexibility to meet employer needs. And let me make sure of everything.
And in terms of, one comment I'd like to make on that early implementation, Christina's been very upfront with that and indicating that going to the early implementation state. And I think at this point, given where we're at in terms of the information that's available out there and the fact that the draft regulations aren't out, we're still moving in that direction, but we're still quite trying to figure out what exactly does that mean. Does that mean we're ready to go July 1st of next year with all provisions of WIOA? Or does it mean, a different date? So we're still working through that and we've been in contact with DOL, and we're hoping to get some more information from them on exactly what that means too, because that's a term that they've used as well in early implementation.
But what is good about the early implementation too is we see it as a good opportunity to provide influence or input into the legislation and rules as they are being drafted and put into practice. So some dates to remember. The proposed rules will be published on January 18th, 2015. The WIOA takes effect on July 1st, 2015, and the eligible training provider list or our career education consumer report and provisions must be implemented by July 22nd, 2015. The final rules will be published in January of 2016, and then the WIOA State Unified Plan and Performance Indicators are due March 3rd, 2016 to take effect July 1st in 2016. So the bill maintains the basic structure of WIA in that a lot of the activities and services are the same as WIA. WIA is repealed, but there are still some similarities with the new legislation. There are performance and measures and outcomes. It maintains the eligible training provider list, but it also is different from WIA in a couple of ways. It eliminates 15 of the federal training programs, which would include incentive grants, pilots and demonstration projects, the Workforce Innovation Fund, youth opportunity grants, and community-based job training programs. It has a single set of outcome metrics for the core programs. The core programs under the WIOA are the Adult Dislocated Worker and Youth Program, Adult Education and Literacy Programs, Wagner-Peiser Employment Services, and programs under Title I of the Rehabilitation Act. We'll touch upon performance a bit later in the presentation, but as a state, Michigan has 3 of the 4 required core partners actually under the WIA roof or building, I guess you want to say. So that will make it really easy for us to implement as we move along. The WIOA also eliminates the sequence of services. They are now known as career services, so your core and intensive services are combined into career services, and then you also still have training services. You do not have to go through the sequence of core or intensive services, aka career services, before you put someone in training. They come into your door, you determine eligibility, yep, you can go into training. The WIOA also provides for better coordination. It addresses the alignment of workforce programs by aligning workforce programs with economic development and education activities. Businesses identify in-demand skills and connect workers with opportunity to build upon those skills. It supports strategic planning and streamlining current governments and administration by requiring core programs to develop a single comprehensive state plan, and individuals with disabilities are ensured that they have the skills necessary to be successful in businesses that provide competitive integrated employment. The local board provisions are also affected. The size of the local board is reduced since programs, or it eliminates the requirement that all of the one-stop partner programs be on the board. Youth councils are no longer required. Standing committees to assist with the operational and other issues relating to the one-stop delivery system, youth services, and individuals with disabilities. Locally elected officials continue to have a key role in strategic planning and the structure of the workforce services. It also adds the requirement that a representative of joint labor management partnership must be included among the labor, community-based, and youth-serving organization contingent. For local plans, the plan term is 4 years, but modifications must be made every 2 years. Plans must include strategic planning elements, how the board will expand services, or access to employment, training, and education and supportive services, strategies and services used to facilitate employer engagement, how education and workforce activities will be coordinated with secondary and post-secondary education, and how the board will coordinate adult education and literacy programs. The list of required elements for local plans is much more comprehensive than it was under the WIA. The WIOA provides for regional coordinations. States are required to identify regions in consultation with local boards and chief elected officials. As a state, Michigan has already done a lot of these things with prosperity regions, so we are well ahead of the game. Local boards and CEOs in each planning region engage in regional planning process, resulting in a regional plan that incorporates all of the local plans in the region. For the one-stop delivery system, required partners include those under the WIA programs, programs under the Second Chance and programs under the Second Chance Act. Additional partners with the approval of the board may also include employment and training programs administered by the Social Security Administration, SNAP, employment and training programs. other client assistance programs, and national and community services state grants, and other appropriate federal, state, or local employment. Just a little bit on one-stop infrastructure funding. WIOA requires that the state board establish objective criteria and processes to assess the effectiveness, physical, and programmatic accessibility and continuous improvement of the one-stop centers. It requires Wagner Kaiser Employment Services to be co-located within the one-stop center. Mandatory partner program contributions are based on proportionate use of the one-stop centers. And based on our interpretation, we don't see this as being any different from what we are currently doing now. It's all about collaboration and connections, with an increased focus on services for employers through improved connections with institutions of higher learning, including community colleges, with an emphasis on attainment of post-secondary credentials that include industry-recognized certificates or certifications, improved connections with institutions of education, collaboration between registered apprenticeship and adult and dislocated worker and youth programs, and pre-apprenticeship is an authorized youth program activity to help participants meet requirements for registered apprenticeships. For both adult and dislocated worker activities, WIOA essentially maintains the current law, but amends the provision regarding the transfer authority so that you can now move 100% of your funds between the adult and dislocated worker programs. It eliminates the sequence of services, and which are consolidated into what is now known as career services. Local boards are required to convene, use, or implement industry sector partnerships, and mechanisms for the boards to provide education and training to eligible participants by adding optional methods for training under certain guidelines. Optional methods include contracting for classroom training for multiple participants on a pay-for-performance basis, incumbent worker training, and transitional job strategies. It maintains the use of individual training accounts, expands the current list of exceptions to where training may be provided through contracts for services. It increases the reimbursement level for OJT, expands the list of permissible local employment and training activities, allows local areas to provide support activities to help low-wage workers retain and enhance employment, and maintains the current language allowing local areas to provide needs-related payments. With the reimbursement levels for OJT, actually we have a waiver for 90% level of reimbursement, so we intend to still seek waivers as we can to keep some of the opportunities for reimbursements and things like of that nature to allow as much flexibility to the locals as we can. Local areas are also able to provide needs-related payments to adults and dislocated workers who are unemployed and do not qualify for unemployment compensation. Under required local activities, establish and provide career services, which are the core and intensive services through the one-stop delivery system. Examples of career services would include your eligibility determinations, your outreach intake, which may include worker profiling, follow-up services. The list is very comprehensive, so I'm not going to go through them all. We still have priority for individuals on public assistance and other low-income individuals that are basic skills deficient. Training services are provided to individuals that are unlikely or unable to obtain or retain employment, leading to economic self-sufficiency. They have added a number of training services, including occupational skills training, entrepreneurial training, transitional jobs, job readiness provided in combination with services, adult ed and literacy, And priority consideration is given to programs that lead to recognized post-secondary credentials. Just a word about incumbent worker training. Permissible training activities include those that improve coordination with other programs. Training in non-traditional occupations such as those for displaced homemakers, entrepreneurial skills training, and micro-enterprise services. Skills,
I think you went
I'm off,
past your,
aren't
Janice, I
Skip
think
the
you went
slide.
past your slide.
Sorry. Skills upgrading, certification for recognized post-secondary credentials, and training to address risk factors related to layoff aversion activities. Okay. Now on to incumbent worker training. Sorry. Incumbent worker training programs, the amount reserved for incumbent worker training is up to 20% of your allocated funds. No waiver is required to use your local funding for incumbent worker training. It requires employers to pay for a non-federal share on a graduated scale based on the size of the employer. The employer's non-federal share can include the amount of the wages paid to workers while they participate in training. So again, there's no need now for a waiver if you're going to do incumbent worker training. The federal share for employers, those are, again, based on the size of the employer. And then the non-federal share may include the wages paid by the employer. The employer may also provide cash or in-kind.
If I could just say a few additional words on this. So
Sure.
the 20% of allocated funds, that's off your adult and dislocated worker screens. And then, for the first time, we are seeing this sort of employer match piece in here. But then also in our initial analysis, we feel, just in a very preliminary analysis, that there may be a little bit more latitude to do incumbent worker training than we've maybe seen under WIA and what the layoff aversion guidance that has come out from USDOL. So certainly this is one area that we're keeping an eye on as this process proceeds and the regulations come out, just to ensure, again, that you have the maximum flexibility available to you in order to utilize this training option if you wish.
Okay, and then also, we just went through the required activities earlier. Now, some of the allowable activities for adult and dislocated workers and now include supportive services, needs-related payments, transitional jobs, and work support activities. Transitional jobs are a time-limited, basically to provide a participant with work history to demonstrate success in the workplace so they can develop the skills to move into unsubsidized employment. The needs-related payments would be for your adults and dislocated workers who are unemployed and do not qualify for or have ceased to qualify for unemployment insurance benefits. Work support activities designed to assist low-wage workers in retaining and enhancing employment activities, participate in activities during non-traditional hours. And then, of course, we all know what supportive services are. They're used to provide assistance so that an individual can participate in the program and then participate in work as needed as well, by providing services or work clothing, things like that. And so from there, I'm going to let you. Oh. Before we go to
Ready to transition.
transition to you.
So I think this is a good opportunity to kind of take a little pause, kind of let it sink in. I know it's a lot of information to cover. I think the biggest takeaway from what Janice has said with the adult dislocated worker, not a huge amount of changes, and in some cases we've got now the flexibility that we kind of always wanted in the past or had by a waiver. Other areas, there's more regional planning and coordination. We don't see a huge amount of changes, but there is still changes here from WIA. So I think this is a good opportunity to kind of take a break, and if anyone has any questions kind of around the information Janice has covered so far, before we move on to the
either it was good or I put them off to sleep.
And I think it's key to know too, I mean, I want to talk a little bit about, I think it's a good time to talk a little bit about our process internally. Christine had put together 9 teams at the agency, and all 9 of those teams had a representative from the Michigan Work System on those teams. And so we've been kind of combing through the act and really trying to familiarize ourselves with it, and again, make comparisons and what are the changes. But obviously, we don't have the draft regulations at this point. We have a lot of questions that maybe we don't have answers to. And so we're just sort of, beginning to work through this process.
Do you anticipate any significant changes in eligibility requirements?
For the adult and subject
Right.
worker, we didn't see a lot of significant changes in eligible for that population. We will see that when we get into them.
What about when you determine eligibility? If all of the services, core intensive training are all together, at what point do you have to determine?
And that is an excellent question, and it's actually one of the questions that came out of, I think, multiple teams that looked at the career services. And yes, we were used to under WIA, we had core services and you had your self-service and your staff assisted, and you sort of knew, okay, at the point that they go to staff assisted, you make sure that they're eligible, I got all my documentation. That is actually one of our questions. Now that we've transitioned to career services, at what point, yes, are we determining eligibility? And I don't feel like we have an answer to that question at this point. So we will definitely be looking to well in our conversations with them, and then certainly to the regulations to provide clarity on that exact point.
Again, my name is Kelsey Mates, and I am our WIA, soon-to-be WIOA, Youth Program Specialist. So I just wanted to discuss, and this will be brief, some changes that we're going to see with the implementation of WIOA. So our first major change is we're expanding the age range from 14 to 21 to 14 to 24. This brings us in alignment with other workforce programs such as Job Force Board and Youth Bill. Our second major change is where we used to look at younger versus older youth. We are now only looking at in-school versus out-of-school youth, which brings us to perhaps our biggest change, which was our 30% minimum expenditure requirement for out-of-school youth. It will now be up to 75%. As a nation, in 2004, 32% of WIA funds were used for out-of-school youth. In between 2004 and 2013, that number went up to 49%. As a state in Michigan, in 2013, we used 35% of our funding on out-of-school youth. So where USDOL looks at this 75% is definitely attainable, we will be seeking a waiver to help us with a more seamless transition up to that level.
If I just add to comment too on the 75%, when I attended a meeting this summer, and there were some congressional staffers who actually worked very closely in both chambers with the passage of this legislation, and they were asked the question, why the emphasis, why move the bar so far, and why the emphasis on out-of-school youth, and just to sort of give you a window into their thinking, not that it changes the requirement, is they really felt like there were, other programs that were sort of targeting other segments of the youth population to really support them. And then here is where they really needed to make a movement towards an emphasis on this out-of-school youth population. And they saw that as their opportunity to support and connect this population.
Right, so our in-school youth have additional resources because they're enrolled. Our out-of-school youth is where we need to move towards serving this population and providing them with additional resources. So our next major change was we did not have an expenditure minimum requirement for work experience, where now we're going to see a 20% minimum expenditure requirement for work experience. So that's going to cover job shadowing, internships, pre-apprenticeship programs, and so on. Our youth definitions have changed a little bit. Our out of school is now going to cover 16 to 24, so that's going to be our older age range. That's a participant who is not attending any school and has one of the following barriers. So a major change that we're seeing here is we used to have a 5% income exception, which meant that all of our youth participants needed to be low income except for 5%. Now, for our out-of-school youth, we only see a low-income requirement for our basic skills deficient and English language learner participants, as well as our youth who require additional assistance. And our in-school youth is going to be 14 to 21 attending school, and all of our in-school youth are still going to have to be low income, and we do still have the 5% exception for that population as well.
I'm sorry, they can put a fast in the out-of-school one. So out-of-school has to be low income as well, or do you say?
Out of school, if you are basic skills deficient, an English language learner, or require additional assistance, those are low income out of school.
So if I'm a runaway, or if I'm home, or if I'm from the juvenile system, I don't have to be low income?
Not by what we've seen from the definitions that they've put forward.
Or if I'm a dropout, I can go from the school out.
This is what we have so far from the bill. So we are expecting further definition. As Krista said, we do still have some questions that remain unanswered. And how they're going to calculate the 5%, whether it's going to be on the entire youth population or whether that's only going to apply to our low-income categories here remains to be seen. That is something that they will be providing additional information on.
And low income now is,
We are going to discuss, yeah, we're going to discuss that as one of the changes as well. Oh, all right.
The second, excuse me, could you look at the second box there, it says age 16 or under. And at the top it says you have yet to be 16 to 24.
I'm sorry. So age 16 or under, this is going to cover youth with disabilities. There's some further explanation in the bill itself. So that's something where, again, it was kind of a gray area. We don't know exactly how far that age range is going to expand out.
16 is a key number.
Right. Okay, and our low income is now going to include free or reduced school lunch and those living in a high poverty area, which is to be further defined by WIA. They've made that statement, that we should see that in the draft regulations.
but in one of our counties, there's schools that everybody gets free lunch.
Correct.
So that would probably be the first time I don't hardly enough.
But how do you get free or reduced lunch if you're not in school?
Right, this is for our for our in-school
Okay, in
population.
school, I'm sorry.
And we're going to see 5 new youth elements. We have a total of 14 now, including the 5, and that's because one has been swept into another. Our summer employment opportunities have been swept into work experience. And our 5 new include education offered concurrently with and in the same context as workforce preparation activities and training for a specific occupation or occupational cluster, financial literacy education, entrepreneurial skills training, services that provide labor market and employment information about in-demand industry sectors and occupations available in the local area, such as career awareness, career counseling, and exploration services, and activities to help prepare for and transition to post-secondary education and training. And we don't have a lot of further information on exactly what they're expecting these elements to look like in practice. And again, as soon as we have that information, we'll be sharing that with the field. So does anybody have any questions about youth? I know this is very short, but we're kind of working with a time constraint here.
When you said they rolled the work experience component, does that mean if you provided work experience and then met the 20% limit during the school year, you didn't have to operate, you don't have to operate a summer program?
That summer program is now going to be included in, the summer employment opportunities are now included in the work experience. So that will go
Well,
towards your
I'm
20%.
asking the opposite. You indicated it's because of the 20% that you have to spend on work experience. But we said that you did have to run a summer component. Okay, and I'm asking, do you still have to run a summer component if you meet the 20% during the school year?
Okay, so the needing to determine expenditures for summer youth, that requirement, that I don't have any additional information from USDOL on whether or not those expenditures will be required.
So hopefully there would be further guidance in the regulations
Right.
that would let us have some more clarity around that issue.
And that's another thing, you know, they're publishing the draft regulation in January. It's the following year in January that they publish the final. There certainly could be a lot of changes in the draft. If I recall, and I've been through this a few times, many times the comments are about 3 times as large as the draft regulation.
Right.
And it does drive change to the system. And I'm not sure, you know, if I were in your shoes, I would not necessarily want to be one of the early implementers because, you know, some of the things could change drastically. And
Yeah, I think part of, that's absolutely, you highlight one of the key challenges with the implementation of WIOA, but I think also in being out there out front, part of what we're hoping as a system to drive is some influence on those final regulations. And sort of, you know, the more that we can get out there and sort of figure things out, sort of push for our interpretations as a system that allows our system maximum flexibility where we feel we need flexibility, I think we see that as both an opportunity and a challenge. Yes, it is certainly, we are being asked to implement WIOA next July 1st, most provisions of it, and yes, we will be operating under draft regulations, presumably at that point.
And John, I think it's important to note too that, I mean, we definitely realize that as far as what are the pitfalls to doing that. But I think at this point, to Krista's response is, we think there are some benefits that we most certainly can hopefully gain from being an early implementer. But those are the discussions that we're going to have in a negotiation, if you will, with USDOL, because they want some early implementers. They want to test some of this out. They want to try some of it out. And they're, you know, our desire would be that we would expect leniency, at least at the beginning, as we're trying this out and rolling the things out. Because you're absolutely right. You're asking us, DOL, to implement a program, and the final guidance will be out 6 months later. What does that mean?
Do you think that there's a possibility that some provisions of the new legislation will ask you not to implement until the final regulations?
Oh, potentially, and I think that's exactly why that's exactly why the performance metrics don't go into the next year. One of the performance metrics is Department of Labor working with Department of Education and creating a new measure. And so that's why you see the state plan is pushed to the second year and performance metrics are pushed to the second year. Because I think they realize there's no way to get those going, and to think about the negotiation that has to happen with all 50 states, that the 50 states have to turn around and negotiate with all their local areas, and the benchmarking. I mean, that's our big question, is how are you going to set that first year of performance metrics for these, especially when you look at the youth program and the differences. I mean, I think DOL will say, tongue-in-cheek a little bit, the adult program and dislocated worker have really not changed a lot. And that would probably where they would say you really can start moving a little more quickly with that, but they may, the youth program, there are significant changes. But, I mean, completely agree that who puts up, who implements and starts a new program and they don't get the final guidance till 6 months later? But, I mean, really, the hope is that we can have some method. DOL, yeah. The state, I'm sure we need that sometimes too. So, I mean, valid points. There is a group of us and actually a couple of Michigan Works Agency representatives. We are leaving tomorrow afternoon to go to Chicago for a day and a half to meet with DOL. They have a town hall. These are exactly the type of things that we want to talk to them about. We want to press them on. We want to be at the table is the point though. And if it means being an early implementer, to have a seat at the table to say, hey, great idea with this, but here's where we need to move it to. That's what we feel like we have to do and want to do. Because again, they want early implementers. Let's be one of them. Let's go out there. Let's forge it. Let's ask for forgiveness. As we start rolling out our program, they say, hey, that's not really what we thought about, but great idea. And that's where we get to shape the regulations.
Do you know how many other states will be or will be at the table?
I do not, something,
So we were in Chicago this summer with the 10 regions, Region 5, which is Midwest states. And honestly, I don't think there'll be a lot because they looked at us and went, what, you have Wagner Pfizer co-located in your one stop? You have TANF in your one stop? I mean, there are some of the things that we take for granted. Other states, this is a major override to them into their system and people working together. So I'm not sure they'll be, because they all want to huddle around us. Because we started, Assistant Secretary Wu was at this meeting. I mean, we got to sit across the table from her and started talking to her. And the questions we were asking, all the other states are like, wait, can we talk to you? You know what? So probably not, because it's more of, they have a lot more work from a foundation and a framework standpoint that they need to get in place at this point.
Can you describe that waiver that you're talking about with the out-of-school funding level?
I'm sorry?
Can you describe that waiver that you were talking about in regards to the out-of-school waiver?
So in the bill itself, it states that minimum allocation states, which Michigan is not, may seek a waiver to bring the 75% minimum requirement down to 50. Then later on, some discussions that happened did include that minimum state or minimum allocation state language. And it was implied that perhaps USDOL may be looking to remove that language and that waiver may be open to all states. Either way, we're going to request it because again, we want to do everything that we can to ease your transition to that requirement.
So you're seeking a waiver just during the transition period?
I think we'll keep seeking it as long as we can to promote flexibility. But I think we've got more of a leg to stand on during the transition period, especially given that, last year our national average was 49%, but in Michigan it was only at 35% for certain those out-of-school years. So for us, it's going to be a little bit more of a challenge.
Can I just, one clarifying point, because I want to make sure everyone, WIOA goes into effect July 1st. So when we say we want to be early implementers, we're talking about we would be doing things in December, January, February. So I just want everyone to be aware that WIOA goes into effect except for the state and local plans and performance metrics. Everything else that Chelsea and Janice and Krista have talked about, they all go into effect, ready or not, this, 10 months from now, 9 months from now. So just keep that in mind. But for example, board structure, we have dropped from 25 Michigan Works agencies to 24. And there's reorganization going on. That means there's new board structures. We're going to say, hey, look at WIOA's board composition versus WIA's board composition. So that would be an example where we would go to the feds and say, we're local, a couple local areas that have consolidated, they're reconstituting their boards, and we're going to meet the intent of WIOA versus WIA. So again, July 1st, it's everything, it goes into effect. It's what happens between now and July that we try to implement early.
With the 30 versus 75%, clearly there are some states who are spending more than that 49 in order for your average grant. Are we looking at what they're doing so that maybe the state associations can provide us, the local areas, with ideas of how do you do this transition, how do you serve the out of school better? Are we looking at what anybody else is doing to
That's a part of this whole transition process, is us working with those states to get their best practices. And it is true, there are quite a few states who have said, you know, our K-12 system really needs to be providing more services. They've already pulled those funds, and they've already changed their priorities to serving those older out-of-school youth. So, yes, but it remains to be seen what kind of materials we're actually going to get.
So the early implementation would be January 1 next year?
I don't think we have a specific date in mind per se. Again, we're meeting with WIA, we're trying to get more information and really, trying to establish what early implementation means and what can we move forward on. So I wouldn't say that we have a hard, steadfast date set in stone that we're going to be implementing by date X and we're going to be ready to go. It's just we know we want to keep pushing ourselves and keep working on this process, getting all the answers we can get and moving forward, try to get this moving forward and start it as soon as we can.
You don't anticipate January 1 that we're now going to need to, for the youth program, any new enrollment, all these new requirements?
I mean, certainly on any change, when it goes into effect, there would be ample prior communication so that you as a system were aware of what the changes and when we're putting it into effect. And again, we're trying to work through these early implementation issues as we go out so we don't have a specific steadfast date for when we want to start certain items.
All right, crazy question. Traditionally, the cost per student for out-of-school students is usually a lot higher because of all the supports that go along with that. So, any idea, like, funding gonna be increased to allow for this 75% or reserve that as a whole?
I think certainly, the funding in general is tied to the appropriations process, and at this point, we don't know the outcome of that process.
And I did misspeak, so I'd like to correct myself. Your question regarding the 16-year-olds, that includes youth who are of compulsory age of attendance. So in Michigan, that is 6 to 16. So I'm sorry I said disabled, and that was incorrect. Please forget that. So our question was, is that all youth? And obviously we don't expect it to go down to 6-year-olds, but is that going to let us bring that age back? Are we going to see some flexibility with that? So that is a question that we will be asking USDOL as well. So my apologies for that.
Moving on to performance and accountability for all programs. Core indicators for Title I, Title II, III, and IV, which would be your adult DW, your adult literacy, your Wagner-Kaiser, and your rehabilitation programs. The core indicators for performance are the same across the board. So they're looking at your percentage of participants in unsubsidized employment, both during the second quarter and the fourth quarter after exit, your median earnings of participants in unsubsidized employment during the second quarter after exit, your percent of participants who obtain a recognized post-secondary credential, a secondary school diploma or equivalent during participation or with 1 year after program exit, your percentage of participants who during a program year are in education that leads to a recognized post-secondary credential or employment and who are achieving measurable gains towards those goals, and your indicator of effectiveness concerning employers.
Too, I would want to add, this is one area where we're definitely looking for a lot more information and clarity from DOL. We need definitions, more in-depth definitions. We're going to need templates and everything for the system to be up and running. So there's a lot of unknowns right now with the performance. So at this point, we just kind of have the overview of the measures and what was within the act, but really we think there's going to be a lot more detail, hopefully, provided in the regulations that really sort of get at defining these in greater detail and what actually is going to be the makeup of these measures.
also, under performance and accountability would be your credentials, and that includes participants who have earned a credential, could only be included in the percentage counted as meeting the criteria if they've obtained or retained employment or are in an education or training program leading to a recognized credential within 1 year of exit. Other indicators that the Secretary of Labor and Education are establishing one or more primary indicators of performance that indicates effectiveness in serving employers. Again, this is where I think we as a state, with being early implementers, we possibly can have some influence on this. Because I'm thinking, in my mind, how do you measure effectiveness of employers? I mean, there could be a wide range of indicators. It permits us also to identify additional measures in our state plan. I don't know what those would be, unless they're related maybe to customer satisfaction. That's what we're currently doing now. Adjusted levels of performance are set for the first 2 years, and then adjusted levels for the third and fourth years will be determined prior to that third year. As far as evaluations and sanctions, essentially the existing language from WIA is maintained in the WIOA. So again, if you're not meeting performance, you'll be provided technical assistance. Still don't meet it, you could be subject to sanctions. But again, USDOL and USDOE, Labor and Education, are developing the templates for performance. The eligible training provider list, or in Michigan, the Career Education Consumer Report, it retains the consumer choice requirements. Your eligibility to be listed on the CECR, it maintains the current law. There are some added requirements that the state consider the degree to which training programs relate to in-demand industry sectors and occupations in the state, which basically we do. We say that the training must be provided to an in-demand occupation. Providers may receive initial eligibility for only 1 year prior to a particular program. Provider performance is still required, and priority consideration is given to programs that lead to a recognizable secondary credential or credentials aligned with in-demand industry sectors. The last few slides just quickly touch upon some of the other programs. Job Corps program, there are some contracting requirements for Job Corps centers. It reauthorizes Native American programs, migrant and seasonal farm worker programs, and youth build. It also includes provisions for national dislocated worker grants, which we currently identify as national emergency grants, or NEGs. And then it talks about independent evaluation of Title I activities is required every 4 years.
If I could say a few words about the dislocated worker grants. Again, in general, we reviewed that section of the Act. Didn't see a lot of big changes to the procedures there. If anything, a little bit more flexibility in terms of who would be eligible for a national emergency grant, what types of folks might be included, especially if you get into disasters. And then really, it appeared in the language that was used there, it was really moving kind of along the thinking and the lines of a lot of the language we've seen DOL use in the last couple of national solicitations. And so this really sort of, kind of carried that thought process through. And for the first time in the Act, we see some deadlines on DOL for action in terms of decisions on requests for our national dislocated worker grants, and then for actually issuing the notice of obligation. So it's really, again, not a lot of large changes, but if anything, the few changes that we saw were minor and they were positive.
For Title II adult education and literacy programs, there's an emphasis on ensuring states and local providers of basic skills, adult education, literacy activities, and English language acquisition concurrently or integrated with occupational skills training to accelerate the attainment of secondary school diplomas and post-secondary credentials. It places an emphasis on career pathway approaches for adult learners. It requires all basic adult education and literacy programs to use, again, the same set of core performance standards that are applied to adult and dislocated worker and youth programs. It also requires that we submit a unified plan with the other core programs that are required in the Act. And then there also is a provision on corrections education. It requires eligible agencies to carry out academic programs, including adult ed and literacy activities, and tutoring, peer tutoring, transfer to reentry initiatives, career pathways, etc. For Title III, the main change, again, is that there are performance measures that, again, are aligned with the same core performance required for adult and DW. The amendments generally maintain the current law. And then funding, again, is allowed to provide professional development of staff as to strengthen the quality of services.
I think it's important to note here, a key difference that for WIA, WIOA actually repealed WIA, but with waiver Kaiser, it's amended. So that's a key difference to keep in mind.
And then amendments to the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. WIOA amends and reauthorizes the Rehabilitation Act, which was last reauthorized in 1998. Vocational rehab agencies are required to make pre-employment transition services available to all students with disabilities and to coordinate those services with transition services provided under the Individuals with Disability Education Act. State voc ed programs will set aside 15% of their federal program funds to help young people with disabilities transition from secondary to post-secondary education programs and employment. Amendments establish a framework to ensure every young person with a disability, regardless of their level of disability, has the opportunity to experience competitive integrated employment. And then the last Title V are just the general provisions. Again, in this section, WIA is repealed in its entirety. Other laws are amended, such as the Higher Education Act, to change the WIA language into WIOA, and it also includes changes to other laws, again, to just amend the language. Our administrative cost provisions are largely maintained from WIA, and it specifies other things such as privacy protections, Buy America requirements, all of those other things that they just kind of threw into the last section of the bill. So with that, are there any questions?
Whenever it comes to the second one, there's actually the names of performance measures. The big concern is we call underemployment in both programs, but we're looking at a different corridor. So it technically is a different number that we're going to come up with. So with that said, if you can add a policy figure, that would be beautiful. And you can look back and use our legacy data to set a performance measure rather than just look at our current employment, move it over and make it the same and roll the dice. I mean, those cost savings, the way to do it, but I'm saying if you can look at that data and use it, we can have fun results.
Any comments?
There's some additional slides, we weren't sure if we have time, but looks like we have time to do just a couple more
Oh,
slides.
let's ask questions.
Or you can comment.
We just have a few quick slides on the changes in statewide activity.
Oh, well, and also there's our contact information. So you can also email us or whenever if you have additional questions that you might have after the presentation. So I have some supplemental slides on adult and dislocated workers statewide activities and youth statewide activities. Under the state board provisions, WIOA reduces the size of the state workforce boards. They're provided with additional responsibility to help achieve state strategic vision and goals. At least 20% of the board membership must include workforce representatives. The boards may include community-based organizations, and it requires a representative from each of the four core programs, which again are adult DW and youth, adult education, rehabilitation, and Wagner Mechanism.
So again, with the state board, we should be looking at a smaller, nimbler, more strategic board.
Some of the state board functions are also expanded. New functions would include leading efforts to engage employers, developing career pathways, promoting proven and promising practices, and more effectively utilizing technology. There are some additional required statewide activities that the state must fund, and the list of allowable statewide activities has been greatly expanded. The governor, it requires the governor to reserve not more than 15% of the adult DW and youth programs for statewide workforce investment activities.